This video was brought to you by Skype, a platform for startups and small businesses to create professional investor decks and sales presentations. Get 1 free month by signing up at slypebean.com/YouTube. All of a sudden, video calls have become part of our daily lives. From university classes and business meetings to birthdays and yoga, online is the new normal and it will be for a while. Fortunately, there are plenty of options: Zoom, Meet, and Microsoft's own Teams. But there's a name that seems to have disappeared. A name, mind you, that not so long ago was the go-to program for video calls. It's safe to say that if all of this had happened in 2010, we would have been Skyping. But now, we're doing anything but Skyping. What happened with Skype? We'll tell you in this episode of Company Forensics. The origins. The team behind Skype was talented to say the least. Janus Friis and Niklas Zennström founded the company in 2003. Estonian developers Ati Heinla, Priit Kaselsalu, and Jan Tallinn created the software. I'm sure I pronounced all this wrong, but these guys also created Kasa, which helped many of us acquire movies and games in the early 2000s. You might remember that. In fact, the peer-to-peer foundation that made Kasa successful would be essential for Skype. In fact, it was even in the name, originally conceived as Sky Peer-to-Peer. Then it was reduced to Skyper, but trademark issues forced them to eliminate the R. The idea? Free calls over the internet using a voice over IP system. This software turns the user's voice into data, then sends it as digital packages over the internet. But voice over IP wasn't new. Actually, it existed for years, so what was new with Skype? Well, based off the software from Kasa, Skype used peer-to-peer, which meant data didn't have to be processed by a central server. No central server meant less infrastructure, which was a cost-effective business model. Skype's seemed promising, lower call costs around the world. The team was so confident that Janus Friis was quoted as saying, "We hope that one day, instead of saying I'll call you, people will say I'll Skype you." And spoiler alert, he was right. 1 month after the launch, 1 million people had downloaded the software. By mid-2006, Skype had over 115 million Skype customers and was recognized as the fastest growing internet community at the time. Skype's recipe was very attractive. Calls within Skype were free, which was great, but also Skype users could call land and mobile phones known as Skype out. Regular land and mobile phone users could call a Skype account known as a Skype in. All of this for cheaper rates. In fact, it was so efficient that some countries eventually banned Skype altogether to protect their phone companies. Video calls boosted the software's popularity even more, and the company was beginning to attract possible buyers, especially a certain online auction company called eBay, who dished out $2.6 billion for Skype in 2007. It seemed pretty logical. Skype gave eBay better communications between buyers and sellers and helped reduce friction in e-commerce. Now, a detail here is that both Friis and Zennström remained as part of the executive team. But this massive purchase rapidly proved flawed. The first criticism was the cost, as experts considered it aided in speculation. Just wait and see what happens later. Then Zennström and Friis constantly butted heads with eBay's executives, so much so that by early 2008, Skype had gone through at least 5 presidents and CEOs. Underperforming numbers and diminishing customers due to competition forced eBay to write down Skype by $1.43 billion in value. So eBay pretty much admitted to having paid too much for the company. Such was the friction, in fact, that Zennström and Friis left. They had an ace up their sleeve: stability and growth. After rotating through CEOs, Josh Silverman ended up in charge in February 2008. Coming in from another section of eBay, his task was to douse the chaos inside the company, and he accomplished it, perhaps too well. He shifted his efforts towards video calls, revamped the subscription program, and created premium accounts. One key move was the creation of an iPhone app, which was a huge hit with 1 million downloads in just 2 days, as well as moving forward with an Android version. He also shed excess weight by removing plenty of features, including Skype's own version of the Yellow Pages, the Skype Me feature, which allowed non-contacts to call you, and removed the Skype Cast feature, a recording software that could record conversations. And the efforts seemed to pay off, as in 2009, Skype grew at a rate of around 380,000 users per day and $740 million in revenue. But not everything was going smoothly. Some say that Silverman made Skype too stable and that too too much of the developments took too long. Plus, call reliability was steadily plummeting. Here's where peer-to-peer comes into play again. Yes, peer-to-peer meant less lag between calls, but Skype was prone to crashing as it relied heavily on individual PCs instead of central servers. When Frizz and Zenstrom sold Skype, they didn't sell the peer-to-peer software. In fact, what they did in the past was license the software to Skype and other companies like Juiced, an internet video service, and Jolted, both of which were theirs. But when eBay announced that it would sell Skype to a group of investors in an effort to free itself of the flawed company, the co-founder said, "Hold up, that's our software you're selling." Legally, if Frizz and Zenstrom were right, any possible sale would go bust. So after much deliberation in the legal front, a deal was struck in which Frizz and Zenstrom ended up with 14% of shares in Skype. And the deal wasn't small, around 2.7 billion, and was finalized in 2009. So in short, they sold it once for a lot of money, then got money on the second sale. That's a pretty smart move. eBay then retained 30% of the company, and Silver Lake, the new investors, ended up with 56%. But once the legalities were over, both co-founders promised to invest heavily in the program, so excitement was high. And as a somewhat independent company, Skype had some very good years. By 2010, 25% of the world's voice calls were made through Skype, in a market that grew just 5 to 6% a year. With such numbers backing it up, Skype looked to raise $100 million in an initial IPO, in hopes of eventually raising at least $1 billion. There was also talk of another sale, which included possible buyers like Google, Microsoft, and Facebook. Not bad at all. And yet, there's another side to the story. Yes, Skype seemed great, but it actually lost about $7 million in 2010 and had a long-term debt of close to $700 million. So the buyer would have to act fast to turn those numbers around. The new era. If you take the good and the bad, it seems that Skype wasn't that bad, but this is company forensics after all. So what went wrong? Well, all the roads lead to Microsoft. On May 11th, 2011, the giant announced that it would acquire Skype for $8.5 billion. Microsoft's offer represented a 300% increase in Skype's valuation in a little over 3 years. Also, they were paying 32 times the operating costs, and the other offers, Facebook and Google, hovered around $3 billion, which was, you could say, closer to reality. So people were left scratching their heads. Here's a quote from Time magazine. "A few years down the line, Microsoft's $8.5 billion purchase of Skype will either seem outrageous or it'll look like a good idea. You may recall that eBay bought Skype for $2.6 billion in 2006, and up until this morning, that figure seemed outrageous. Now, eBay's actually looking pretty smart, which is something that hasn't been uttered for quite some time. Microsoft had a good product to start with. Skype was good in those years, as it now had 40% of the world's calls, and even the Oxford Dictionary included the verb Skype, so good one, Frizz. But where did it go wrong? Well, peer-to-peer comes into play again. What had made Skype successful and what had determined the legal future of the company was its biggest hindrance. Peer-to-peer was great between computers, but worked horribly with mobile phones. In 2013, Microsoft made the right decision in migrating to cloud-based servers, which sounds like a great idea, right? Well, yeah, if you do it quickly and efficiently. Instead, the transition lasted months, which evolved into years. And the bad thing was that Skype was all over new Microsoft products like Windows 8.1, like the Xbox One console, and the Outlook package. Users might remember when Skype calls came in through 2 devices instead of 1. Calls ended abruptly, notifications would come in one device and not in the other. Group calls were hard to set up, and then there was one of its most annoying flaws: those updates. Just as you were preparing for a big video presentation, minutes before starting, Skype decided to update itself without warning, and you were left cursing and frustrated. Meanwhile, competition like WhatsApp was working hard at messaging, and Zoom was working hard at video calls. And they weren't alone, with other options like Meet and House Party rising up the ranks. And what did Microsoft do about this? Well, not much. They included these weird text-activated emojis, they launched and dismantled a video messaging app, their efforts to make Skype better lacked planning, so it wasn't unusual to face updates on a monthly basis, and each update changed the software almost entirely. Around 2016, many Skype users stuck to Skype because, well, others were still using it, and somehow those were good numbers, an estimated 300 million users in fact. But as threats were popping up left and right, Skype's biggest threat came from Microsoft itself. It's the end of Skype as we know it. In 2016, Microsoft launched Teams, a unified communication and collaboration platform directed towards businesses. It was Microsoft's way of evolving its Skype for Business software, and all in all, it was a solid proposal with messaging, video calls, calendar organization, and virtual meetings, all very business-like. Plus, by the end of 2017, Skype was still the go-to software for calls to landlines, but user confidence was diminishing. It just didn't have much else. The new redesign was universally hated, and it was plagued with bugs and missed what made the past versions good. So the app ratings plummeted. Meanwhile, take a direct competitor, Zoom. It was easy to use, users didn't have to be members, and got 40 minutes for free. It's as though it was designed for non-techies. And that was the key. Skype's user experience wasn't kind. Just search for Skype bugs and you'll have plenty of search results to indulge in. Then we have Microsoft's own interests. From 2016 to now, Teams had improved constantly because Microsoft was investing heavily in it. They took all the good from Skype and improved all the bad: data transfers, tasks, video, and calls. And live changes constantly. Take this moment, for instance. As things become even more virtual, Skype's use has increased, but so has Teams. And Microsoft was being pretty honest about maintaining Skype as a for-the-moment tool, as eventually they would migrate everybody to Teams. Microsoft had even announced a Teams for Consumers version, which was widely celebrated. And that's how much people hated Skype. Who celebrates the death of a software? Well, those who worked with it for too long. In the end, Microsoft learned a lot from Skype. Teams seems like the adequate solution, taking the good, leaving the bad, improving altogether. But those lessons learned were worth $8.5 billion. Would you pay $8.5 billion for lessons? Instead of that, don't pay anything. Just watch the rest of our company forensics videos. Hit that subscribe button to do that, and we'll see you next week.